Excellent. Excellent. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our final session for the Careers in Technology Summer Series 2024. Please join me in welcoming our speaker tonight, Michael Viron, a distinguished professional with a wealth of experience in IT management, entrepreneurship, and community engagement. With a career spanning several decades, Mr. Viron has been instrumental in launching startups, company divisions, and technology events since 1995. He is the founder of Careers in Technology this session and has played a key role in its growth and success since its reboot in 2015. Currently serving as the Director of IT and Software Engineering at Contact Intelligence, VET-CV, Mr. Viron oversees technical operations, project management, and strategic planning. He also founded General Education Online, which has been recognized for its innovation and excellence by industry leaders. Beyond his professional achievements, Mr. Viron is deeply committed to giving back through volunteer work with organizations like IEEE and IT Gulf Coast, and by serving on advisory boards for local education institutions. His expertise spans operations, project management, security, and software engineering, and he continues to contribute as a mentor, presenter, and consultant. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Viron. I just want to say thank you so much for teaching me and for mentoring me in this session and in general.
Thank you for the introduction. And let me, I think you have to stop sharing your screen so I can share mine.
Okay.
I think. Okay, there we go. All right, let me go ahead and go over here, share the screen. All right, so hopefully I'm coming through well as far as audio. If you do have a question, please feel free to ask it during the session, either via chat or, yeah, preferably via chat so that Rajesh or Catherine can direct my attention to the appropriate screen. But tonight we're going to kind of go over the lessons that I've learned over the course of the last near 3-decade career in IT, software engineering, basically within the tech space in one form or another, and kind of give you some tools to sort out certain things. Hold on. Why is this? Okay. As Catherine mentioned, I've got quite a wide range of experience covering a wide range of different things, everything from the customer service side of it to actually building computers from the bare metal case up. I've founded a couple different organizations, both volunteer as well as for-profit. And even within the company that I'm working with now, I've been regularly involved with starting different pieces up. And in fact, we're in the middle of starting up a foundation for one of our organizations right now. So the first thing that I started was called General Education Online. It was started in August of 1995 as an independent research project while I was at the University of West Florida. And as of this year, it's currently administering 4 different major software efforts covering everything from the worldwide directory of higher education facilities to what I'm calling the Education Disaster Information System, which was most recently used during the COVID pandemic to provide K through 12 points of contact for the US. And it has been since 1995, is entirely staffed 100% by volunteers. In addition to that, I've also started a group called Web Spinners, folded administrative operations for general education online into Web Spinners back in 97, and then upon graduation spun general education online back out from Web Spinners. But the next company I started, the next company I worked with, aside from a company that wasn't a startup, and my most recent company is Data, started in March of 2002. So I've been there now over 20 years. And I'm basically, if you are talking to someone about any kind of technical related item or even operations at some point, that project is probably going to cross my desk, or the CEO of the company is going to swing by my office and say, here's a contract. I need you to review it and let me know what you think. So what I'm going to cover here, and obviously it's hard to cover everything that you can learn as you're starting different pieces up, is primarily stuff that I've learned during the founding process of General Education Online, the time that I've spent working at KA Metadata. And, it's really designed to provide some options for low or free cost ways to provide certain services for your project as you start things up, as well as make sure that you don't run into some of the challenges that I had very early on as I started different organizations. So the first step is you need to research before you leap into a new project. The biggest thing there is you have to have a well-defined purpose. You need to do the market research to make sure that there is actually a need for whatever it is that you're trying to do. And you need to identify if there are competitors currently in the market for the project that you're about to start. On top of that, especially if it's a software project, you'll want to make sure that you set baseline requirements. Now, the reason that this is important is that helps to limit the amount of rework that you'll have to do later on down the road. So exploring the well-defined purpose side of this a little bit closer. When you do this, you can be better prepared for when you start seeking investors in your project or your organization. And you can better identify the project priorities, meaning the things that need to get done first, and what kind of staffing you're going to need in order to complete those tasks. The reason that this is important is that one of the highest costs related to a startup is, and one of the biggest mistakes people make, is they hire the wrong people at the wrong time. For example, if you don't have a completed product, it does not necessarily make sense to hire marketing or salespeople if they don't have a product to market or sell. So so that's one of the things that you have to sort out is, okay, what are the things that have to be done first before I get into the steps that require marketing, sales, that side of the house to get involved. The second thing that I found is that if you don't have a stable web address, it can cause you to lose momentum and time. Now, I found this out the hard way with General Education Online, which is now on findaschool.org, because at the very start, it was under a directory on my personal account, And so people link to it, link to my personal account. And, when you have hundreds or thousands of people linking to your personal account, it's difficult then to turn around, reach out to those people and tell them, hey, you need to update your link. Because while you can certainly redirect from one link to the next, if that link ever goes away, it becomes a whole different set of issues. And some people just will never update it, in which case eventually it'll go to a 404, especially if that's hosted on like a university server and those kinds of things. So I had to spend time and effort as I transitioned over to findaschool.org to reach back out to these people, get things updated again. And it just took time and effort away from more important things. So the next part of this is when you purchase a domain, you need to make sure that you review the costs of that domain at multiple different registrars. And don't look at just the first year cost. There are so many times where a registrar runs a sale for the first year, says it's 99 cents, and then you don't bother. And then if you don't bother to look to see what the next year cost is, it could be 15 bucks, it could be 20, it could be 40 bucks. Because some of the domains that are some of the domains are very expensive, especially the ones that are more specialized. The next thing is that whenever it is that you decide on a domain, you want to buy at least the .net, the .com, and the .org. And the reason for this is that if you don't, it is going to cost you, even though it costs more on an annual basis, it will prevent you from having to later pay auction level prices. So for example, when I first started General Education Online, I bought the .org and later the .net, but by the time I thought about it, the .com was already purchased, and now I get emails about once a year, once every few months, where they basically tell me, hey, you can have this for 50 grand if you want to spend the money on. I'm obviously not going to spend $50,000 to buy the .com domain, and I have to hope at some point that they'll stop renewing it, maybe, if I'm lucky, or that they'll drop the cost so that I can actually purchase it and make sure that it's part of the domains that I have that are available to me. But just to make sure that you buy at least the .net, the .com, and the .org, because it'll make your life a lot easier later on down the road. So the next thing is to control your expenses with regards to faxing. So the funny thing is that even in 2024, there are some companies that require you to fax stuff in, or that prefer to send you stuff via fax. So at the very least, you have to have an e-fax option so that you can send stuff or receive stuff electronically. Or in our case, we have inbound faxes that come in to an email address and then get basically converted to digital so that they don't print out. And we have fax equipment to actually send out faxes. You can do it either way, especially if you're not wanting to spend the money on an office. Your best bet is to have an eFax, is to use an eFax company that will handle both options. The next thing is that if you have eFax, that means that you're not tied to a physical location. So if you're dependent on using an old school fax machine to send faxes, well, that means then that you have to carry that fax machine around with you if you actually want to send faxes. There's some challenges related to that, because then that also means that you have to print whatever it is that you're trying to fax. And there's a lot of there's a lot less paper and ink and those kinds of things that are going to be used, because to be honest, almost all of the faxes that we have coming in are not legitimate faxes. They're spam faxes of some kind or another. The next part of on the flip side, when you start talking about voice services, well, you can get a cell phone. Cell phone can be expensive potentially, just depending on where you are, what provider you go with, what capabilities you want. So some people are starting to use Google Voice or some of the other options for voice over IP services, so that they're not using their own personal numbers for business purposes. And so the thing is that for a DS, for example, for AT&T, and I just looked at this just last night or the night before last, for no long distance, just to have a phone line run to your house is going to cost you at least 50 something dollars a month. Just to have the line available, not being able to do long distance and not being able to do international. And it goes up from there. So your much better option is to choose to either try to bundle your voice services through the company providing your internet services, choose a different voice over IP like Vonage or any number of other ones, because your monthly expenses are going to be a lot less than they would otherwise be. The next thing is the next expense related to the next set of expenses. And back in the 90s, this was 90s and early 2000s, this was less used. Oh, hang on. Hold on a second. Speaker turned off. Um, so my so in the 90s, early 2000s, web and voice conferencing services were less used, but nowadays it's becoming a much better option, because the thing is that if you're having to travel, say, from Pensacola to California, to pitch to someone in California, you're going to spend easily probably around $600 to $800 or more by the time you factor in the flight, the hotel room, transportation. I mean, it's going to be meals, all the different expenses that go into doing it. It makes things a lot easier. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you don't ever have face-to-face meetings as you need to, but it just makes things a little easier. Now, the other benefit to doing web conferencing and voice conferencing services is that this means that even if there is a disaster in one area, it allows for planning and other and development activities to go on regardless of where someone is physically located. And so on top of that, if someone is traveling back and between Pensacola and California, for example, that's a full day of travel at least. Which means now you've got people that are working from airports, which isn't great for security. Or you have people that are losing time, losing productivity because of the fact that they're traveling back and forth. So it's definitely a balancing act, but it definitely is something to keep in mind. Okay, so the next thing is avoid having a top-heavy structure. So what I mean by that is if you have more managers than you have employees, you have a problem. Because that means that you have almost a one-to-one relationship between your management and your team members. And um, you're going to have a lot of overhead. You're going to have a lot of payroll expenses. It's going to be a lot more expensive. Because typically management is one of the highest paid team members you can have. So you have to make sure that you have enough people that can keep things moving along. So Rajesh and Catherine, if you'll keep an eye on the chat, just on the off chance that there's questions, because on my side I can just see the slide deck and not actually if there's something in the chat. So I just wanted to make sure that
I have a question. I wondered if maybe it would be helpful for people to understand. You were saying that you're in the process of setting up a nonprofit right now. Earlier in the slide, so you
Yep.
mentioned, yeah.
Yep.
So can you describe to us what kinds of, like, is this a nonprofit you're setting up for yourself or for some client or part of the company that you're working for? What is the nature of the nonprofit, and how do you tackle doing that marketing and figuring it out, like assessing it out in the beginning?
So I'll say that I'm tangentially involved in that process. So basically, the when VetCV was first started, there was a foundation that was created at the same time. And they're working their way through the official IRS paperwork to become a 401c3, I believe.
Is it 501c3?
I'm sorry, 501c3. They're working their way through that part of the process. But they basically had to have meetings, select board members. There is a whole very significant process to officially establish a 501c3, and to do it the right way. So they have people that they are talking with, that are guiding through that have experience in actually doing the legal side of it. Most of the stuff that I've been doing is more on the technical side, as far as making sure that, for example, their website works, that they have working email addresses for the foundation that they're effectively starting.
And as you said, that you get all the domain names that you want and make sure that you reserve all those.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Very important stuff. And what do you know what the nature of what they're planning to do with their 501c3?
I haven't been involved in that side of it. At least
There's
not.
enough to do just for the technical part, right? I mean, there's a lot to do just to get the whole thing set up and get the lawyer stuff done and get all those board members, like you said. So that's
Yeah.
quite a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, so on the technical side, there hasn't been a lot of an ask yet. Doesn't necessarily mean that there won't be. Um, but it's too early in the process yet.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
If anyone else has a question, please either put it in the chat or send a carrier pigeon or something, because we'd love to have a nice discussion, a lively discussion. Thanks.
Rajesh, did you have a question?
Now, Kit asked about the board members. My experience has been you want to be careful. You probably want to think about not only a board of directors, but also board of advisors. Initially, better to have board of advisors who are willing to contribute their time without any kind of compensation.
Yeah.
People who would be willing to work with you, understand your vision, understand the purpose of the company, and put you in the right path, making sure you're successful. Or if you're failing, fail fast, recover faster. And it's kind of hard. Much of it is trial and error, but advisors are important.
All right. Okay, so the biggest reason I mentioned the whole top-heavy structure is just you have to be careful, especially if they're paid individuals, because you don't, whatever funding you have, at least initially, is going to likely come out of your own pockets. Whether it's through loans, through seed money, whatever it is, there's ways to get the money that you need in order to start things up. But you just have to be mindful of how you structure things so that you're not spending unwisely and depleting your expenses quickly.
Michael,
Yep, go ahead.
sorry to interrupt you. I was about to type up my question. So if you go back to your previous slide on organizational structure, given the various paradigms we are going through, especially in software systems engineering, what kind of structure have you found works or gels well, particularly in technological setting? Is it agile? Is it crystal? Is it incremental? Is it just having totally flat, not a matrix? DevOps, silos, what kind?
So I will say that for the most part, we were using an agile adjacent method. So it's agile, but with some modifications on how exactly we're moving stuff through the process. So typically what'll happen is that there is a request that comes in. It goes to for some level of review right now by myself, usually. Gets assigned once there's enough of an understanding. And then it moves fairly quickly through the process, goes up to our alpha site pretty regularly, as opposed to, waiting necessarily for it to be 100% completed. And then once we're satisfied with it on alpha, it goes through a QA process and follows more of a traditional software cycle, just to make sure that whatever it is that we're pushing up is stable, as opposed to being in a situation where we're pushing something up and then having to turn around the next day and push another build up. Because they're just based on how the infrastructure is set up, there's some overhead related to pushing a full build of the site up. I will say that our development meetings tend to run long. So if you're doing straight agile, you're typically supposed to run, those initial meetings, or the stand-up meetings, or whatever you want to call them, are typically supposed to run maybe 15-20 minutes at most per day. And ours are typically running anywhere from half hour to a full hour and 15 minutes. So there's certainly room for improvement on that side of it, but we're just, the challenge is with a small team, it's finding kind of that middle ground of having enough structure so that stuff gets done, but not having so much structure that it takes, 6 months to get something into production.
Thanks, Michael. So what you're suggesting is that we have a three-prong. So look at the organizational processes we need to put in place, kind of infrastructure we need to put in place, and kind of team balance or roles that we need to put in place to achieve the outcome initially.
Yeah, exactly.
So be flexible on it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so the next thing is don't mismanage. So the thing is that obviously you're going to provide requirements to whatever team you assemble. But you also need to make sure, especially as the team grows, that you're not so far in the weeds that you lose sight of the data of the overall big picture things. And so the other thing too is that you have to adjust the management style as the number of people involved grows, because managing 10 people is a vastly different experience than managing 200. So going back to Web Spinners, which is one of the groups that I founded, when I first started it, it was probably about 10 to 12 people. And I continued to manage it as a direct report, everyone that was a member, until we hit 200 plus people. When we hit 200 plus people, it eventually got to a point where I completely burned myself out. Went in onto campus, got through my first class that day just fine. Got to the office, started checking emails, and next thing I know, I'm on a stretcher being taken to the emergency room. The reason for that is because, among other things, I was trying to manage 200 people like they were 12. I was not sleeping right. I was not eating right. I had too much caffeine in my system and was skipping meals. I mean, there was a whole laundry list of things that I just wasn't doing that are just not great for your health. So while it's important to get the work done, you have to make sure that it's done in a healthy way, because otherwise you're in a situation like me where you end up in the ER, and then then you could have a whole lot of other problems. So in my case, I was lucky enough that 2 doors down, there was another office. Someone was there that was emergency trained, heard the thud as I hit the floor, came running, called whoever they needed to call to get it sorted out. I was very, very lucky that that person was in the right place at the right time and had the right training. Very soon after that, after I was told by doctors that I needed to be on bed rest for 6 weeks or for 2 weeks, and was basically unable to drive for 6 months. Very quickly after that happened, when I came back to campus, there was someone that was coming into the office all the time. I'm like, you're the new office manager. You set the hours, you staff them, you deal with that. We implemented policies where, if people didn't show to meetings, then they lost the privileges of scheduling meetings with us. There was all kinds of other things, where I started handing off responsibilities so that different people had different pieces that they were over. But you just have to, as you grow, you just have to make sure that you trust the people that you put into place, and you're not trying to manage the people that you have in place, that you're not directly trying to manage everyone that you have in your organization as you continue to grow. As Rajesh had mentioned a little bit earlier, is the key thing is you have to have procedures, you have to have processes, and you have to have policies in place for the development of stuff from the very first day. The reason for this is that it leads to less chaos, meaning that, you know, you don't have two different management individuals competing for resources and telling you to do two different things in the same section. There's some type of vetting process so you can make sure that, hey, this is actually a good idea to be putting time and effort towards this. And it's a chance for those procedures to become part of the organization's culture instead of an afterthought. And the reason that that's important is that as you grow and you add more developers, you have to make sure that the culture is established so that those new people coming on board have an idea as to what you're expecting them to be capable of, what the expectations are for them as they come in. After that, don't try to tackle everything at the same time. Well, you can certainly tackle some projects at the same time. Tackling 40, 50, 60 projects at the same time is going to burn your resources, burn whoever it is that you have working for you out. I would suggest, if you're doing a software project, which is the stuff that I have the most experience with, you start with the core framework. You have to have a solid foundation on which to build whatever it is that you're planning to build. Then you gather the ideas, you decide what needs to be incorporated to allow for whatever those ideas are, and just generally you're going to be much more stable versus trying to tackle 40 or 50 things at the same time. Along with that, make sure that you test early and test often. This goes back to having that kind of hybrid agile approach where you push to the alpha site quickly, but you're trying to do it in a way that you reduce the amount of rework that you have to go through. You're trying to catch any issues that you can before they go into before it goes up into production and starts affecting whoever's using your site or app. And it helps reduce the amount of time that you're having to spend on bug fixes. Because, you know, the thing is that, well, everyone the enjoyable part of software development is developing new things, not necessarily having to go back and fix stuff that's broken. At least for me. I mean, I will do it. I'm doing it regularly, but it's definitely better to catch this stuff early before it goes into production so that you're not having to go back 5 years or 10 years later to fix stuff. Now, for example, one thing that happened is that back when I first started for the company I'm working for, performance was not as much of a concern. It was basically, let's just pump this stuff out, get it up, and we'll move on to the next thing. Now we're dealing with stuff that's causing performance issues. So for example, we found places where it would return 10,000 records and have 3 lookups per row. So it would basically be doing 30,001 queries against the database solely to pull back 10,000 rows. So those pages were basically slowed to a crawl because it was having to do an extra 30,000 queries instead of the joins being part of the main query in the first place. Now, and this may seem counterintuitive to the previous slide, but if you select the right type of users, so don't open it up to just everyone, but involve the people that you are the organization types that you're trying to target as early in the process as you can manage. The reason that this is important is that it will, especially if you're doing software development for software as a service, is it will help you identify, here's the features that people are looking for. And well, you can certainly test yourself. Different people have different ways of doing different things. So you're not, I mean, even the most thorough tester, if they are not familiar with, say, recruiting, for example, it's going to be very difficult for them to complete a full real world test on the stuff that you're putting together. Is that a question in the chat? Okay, no.
That was a very nice compliment about how this is an excellent way to end the summer session with an event by our founder, you.
Okay. Well, I certainly appreciate that. Now,
Well, we get to learn from you, we have to move forward and do more things, and you're a tough act to follow because you've been doing everything. You're like an octopus. And we appreciate learning and getting some insight into the things you do, at your real job, not just the things that you do for us and for members of IEEE, and to, encourage people to get out there and do things, but just to hear your thinking process and the experiences you've had, it's awesome. So thank you.
You're quite welcome. Now the other part of this is that if you have users, it helps you to have a focus group. So as part of these users, you have a focus group. That focus group can help you sort out, okay, is the need that you are going to address something? One, does the need exist? And two, whether or not it is currently being catered to. The reason this is important is, for example, if you are trying to get into the business of doing bulk emailing, you're going to find that a very tough area to get into because there are so many companies that are doing it, that are doing it right now, that are highly entrenched in the marketplace for that specific need. Doesn't mean that you can't try, but it's going to be very difficult to get traction for that kind of an issue or for that kind of a need if it's already being addressed by large players like that. Like, for example, in the case of bulk email testing or bulk emailing, we're talking about the MailChimps of the world, SendMail. There's like probably about 40 or 50 of them that will do it already in the marketplace right now. And can probably do it for a price point much less than what it's going to cost for you to get it up and running. On top of this, once you decide that, okay, yes, the need exists, it's not being met by someone in the marketplace currently, or there's very small niche players in the marketplace, as early as you possibly can, gather the requirements before you start into development. Now, I know no one likes writing requirements documents. I don't like writing requirements documents, or, or like actual formal software requirements specification documents. But I am telling you from experience that the majority of code rewrites that we are seeing as we work through stuff right now is because requirements were not written down and reviewed in from day one. So we are having to do code rewrites even on some code in some cases that's 15 plus years old because there was no formal requirements method in place from the very start. Now, the other thing that a requirements document will provide is it'll give you a better idea as to how long it will take you to finish at least the bare bones of what you need for the project. The reason that that's important is that will then in turn inform when can you bring on salespeople, when can you bring on marketing people, when do I need to hire additional resources to keep things moving along? Now, so you start small, but you also need to make sure that you plan for how you grow. Because, for example, if you have an IT manager and you tell them that someone's going to start 2 days in a day, well, that means that that person will probably be working overtime. Because to get especially for a development machine, for us, bare minimum, it takes at least 2 to 3 days to get everything installed and configured that they will need from day one. So make sure when you're sorting out so Rajesh, can you clarify what you mean by the question in the chat?
Essentially, one of the reasons we went with Agile Manifesto in 97 was the unclear requirements. Our requirements keep changing. So there's always a trade-off, right? Either you go for deadline-based development,
yep,
or changing requirements, which means deadlines is just it's just a milestone kind of a thing.
yeah,
It keeps moving.
yeah.
So in few slides back, we spoke about the structure, right? So the process structure, the infrastructure, and the organizational structures.
Yeah.
What kind of flexibility do we need to have to meet these?
So in the case of, so in our case, we went agile hybrid because there's a need to get stuff done as quickly as possible. But there is also a need to make sure that whatever is being pushed up performs well. So it's, from my experience, it's not necessarily a one size fits all thing. Because there are some, because for example, it depends on the size of the project as far as how strictly we're going to adhere to the development processes that we have in place. So for example, if the request is to simply add a dropdown, or not add a dropdown, but add a value in a dropdown, most of the time, not always, but most of the time, that'll be handled as a support request versus going through the full development process that we have in place. On the other hand, if it's like a brand new section for let's see, what's one of the ones that been working on recently? For example, if it's a whole new functionality for creating a feed integration with a third-party vendor, those are going to go through the established process much more stringently. So, for example, there's what we call a statement of work, which is created, which includes what the requirements are, what specific items are going to be included as part of the project, what the time frame is for completion. But even before that, there's meetings with the client to discuss, okay, what type of integration are we talking about? Because, for example, an integration with a bi-directional API, meaning you're both sending and receiving information, is going to take a lot longer to put into place versus, for example, if it's a feed that is only being processed by the vendor. So there's flexibility in what steps are required, just depending on the scope of the project that we're trying to accomplish. Hopefully that answered the question, Rajesh.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. So essentially, again, the flexibility in how you would look at requirements and the decomposition plays a role here then,
Yeah.
I'm assuming.
Yeah. So the full process for us has probably about 15 to 20 steps. So typically some of those, just depending on the scope, will be skipped. Larger projects probably will go through almost every single one of them. And that just helps make sure that especially if the request is coming from an external client, that we don't end up in a situation where the project takes, where they don't keep coming back saying, what about this? What about this? What about this? And obviously, if you don't have requirements, you can't tell them something is out of scope if you don't have requirements. So, we've found over the years that having at least a statement of work which more clearly identifies what is and isn't in scope for a project helps decrease some of those items that are sitting out there. So the next step on this is to plan your growth. So the reason that this is important is as you're growing to more people, especially if you have office space, one, you need to be better prepared when someone starts. Typically, it's better to tell someone 2 weeks ahead of time especially on the IT side of the house, when someone is going to start, because that allows for time to set up the machine, to add the email accounts, to do anything that is needed in order for this person to start, versus them having to spend their first day or 2 days doing nothing but set up related tasks. When you first start, the biggest thing is identify which positions you need to fill, but also to keep this team small to help reduce your burn rate. There was a company in Atlanta called Light Networks. They, at the very start of their organization, rented out a facility that was about somewhere between 15 and 18,000 square feet or more, had enough desks for something like 400 or 500 people, spent $1,000 to $1,500 per seat per station that they were setting up had something like 5 or 6 different distinct networks. So depending on what you were trying to get to, you had to be on different networks. So there was like a network for the network monitoring equipment that was different than the network that the servers were on, which was different from the network that the general computers were on, which was different than the dev equipment was on. I mean, there were executive offices that had upwards of 5 or 6 different machines on their desks just because of the fact that they needed to get to literally every network, like every independent network. And I'm not talking about virtual networks. I'm talking physically segmented networks where they ran duplicate wiring, had separate switches, the whole 9 yards. That's a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money. So, at $1,500 a person, you're talking 600 plus $1,000 that they spent just on furniture, not even on payroll, but $600,000 just on furniture alone when they started. You do not need to spend that kind of money on a team that starts off as 15 people. Nowadays, this is more common. Back in the 90s, 2000s, less common, but basically, when you have a specialized need, a lot of times you may not need that type of role 40 hours a week to start off with. So think about using a consultant on a per hour or per project basis when you start looking at that kind of stuff. Hire roles as you need to. So for example, if you get to a point, if you're using a DBA as a consultant and it gets to a point where you've got enough work for a DBA to be full-time, then obviously you'll want to make sure you hire roles as you need them, and you have a transition plan to transition it from whoever's been doing the consulting over to an internal person. And also, as part of this, you'll want to create a feature roadmap for your growth as well. Oh, Kit is saying it's almost 9 p.m. Wow, the time is going quickly. So let me get through to the last handful of slides, and then we'll just take a few questions, and then we'll call it a night. So the next thing is security, especially right now, cannot be an afterthought. You have to make sure that you have established your security controls and procedures very early on in the startup process, and you have to make sure that the security discussions are being held throughout the entire software development cycle. This should go without saying, but especially if you're in a disaster prone area, such as somewhere that has hurricanes, flooding, earthquakes, what have you, make sure you have an established backup process and make sure it works on a regular basis. I can't tell you the number of times where I've had people that have been frantic, not necessarily at work, but are frantic because they don't have an established backup process, and they're like, what do I do now? Make sure you have something in place. Even at home, even at my home office, I have a network attached storage. I have it backed up to 3 or 4 other places. I've made sure that I have a copy that is up to date somewhere, either on my person or somewhere that's protected, or that can be taken easily with me. And the other thing is, especially if you're dealing with a hurricane or an earthquake or something like that, you might not be able to return to your office for days, weeks, or sometimes even months. if you have to plan for those types of contingencies very early on, so that it'll help mitigate the risks later. For example, during COVID, our staff already had remote access capabilities, already had, the capability, we're almost all exclusively on laptops. We're able to continue working without missing a beat the whole time that the pandemic was going on. This follows along with slide 16. Make sure that you limit anything that is vital that's on premises. If it's on premises and you don't have physical access to the office, is going to be a problem. Try hosting it elsewhere. If you can't do that, try finding a SaaS solution for it. If neither of those are options, make sure that relocating the equipment is part of the disaster planning that you are doing. The worst thing you could possibly do is have server equipment that you can't physically get to. The organizations in New Orleans learned this the hard way. They had backup sites. They weren't geographically separated enough. And I'll tell you, they learned it the hard way to where they now have, a lot of them now have agreements with other universities or other hosting facilities or what have you, to make sure that they have backup systems that can be turned on or that are hot swappable in the event of an emergency so that they don't miss a beat. Yep, there we go. That is the very last slide. I'm going to open it up for any moderated questions that we may have from as provided by Catherine or Rajesh. So that's the end of the talk. Go ahead, either one of you, with any questions that we may have.
Hey, this is really fantastic. Thank you so much for this great, inspiring glimpse into your professional career, your preparation, some of the tough times, some of the, thoughtfulness that you've shared with us. Rajesh, do you have some comments?
Just a couple of things, Michael. Our experience with SaaS, even that requires a backup plan and recovery. You'll be surprised even how the larger organizations, they only have backup plans for their services, but not for your data or your services on that SaaS platform.
Yeah, that's good to know.
Just so we were taken by surprise. So
yeah,
something
to keep in mind.
Is it okay if I share a horror story where there wasn't a backup? Just one little tiny horror story. Is that okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Okay.
Right. So I was in a lab. It wasn't in this country. It was in a different country. Not in your country either. It's just a different country. And it was holiday time. And it was a lab that had animals with things stuck in their head and they were being experimented on. And some of the animals, when they behave a certain way, they would get shocked. And other animals would not. So they were playing music. Some animals would, nice. Other animals would get shocked. Okay. So holiday comes, there are people coming, cleaning the cages, taking care of the animals. Something happened to one of the servers on the server farm. They sent in a person, they changed the drive, and then they rebooted the whole system. And then from that time until the time everyone returned from holiday, all the animals were being shocked constantly because the system reset itself and no one was there to watch. And all these animals it would destroyed all of the animals, the research, and the people who are running the lab considered leaving their career because of it. And so, yeah, backups are important. Just saying.
Yep. And for anyone that is currently still here, this is the last. I mean, most of you probably, at least some of you I know already have my contact information at this point. But here's all the other miscellaneous stuff that's sitting out there. most showing how old some of this stuff is. These technically redirect to HTTPS sites now, so but I missed that when I was updating this particular slide. But that's one final kind of thing is, if you are only running your sites, even if it's a public site, think about putting it on HTTPS. There's sites that have all kinds of stuff related to security headers, SSL encryption methods. We just spent quite a bit of time and effort going through and auditing security headers and SSL stuff for pretty much every one of our production sites recently. So just something to keep in mind, that there's a lot of miscellaneous things that are sitting out there that people may not necessarily be aware of at this point. But I think this
I guess that shows that security is a process, more a process than an outcome.
Yep.
And you never know where the secure feature breakdown could be. You just have to be ready to pivot. And who expected the pandemic? Who expects? There's a lot of stuff that just happens. But it's nice to be able to be flexible.
Yeah.
But I just want to thank our speaker Michael and Rajesh, the co-host, and everyone who attended. It's really great to see you. I hope you noticed in the chat window I posted our upcoming the fall series begins with Professor Victor Lawrence from Stevens Institute of Technologies, previously for 30 years at Bell Labs. I think everyone will have a wonderful time. The season that we're planning is going to be fantastic. So I hope that everyone will come back, and the new version of Michael's
Series.
Careers in Technology, the restarting, right? This new restarting in the fall season. I think it's going to be fantastic. David, do you have a couple of words you want to share with us, as long as you're here? What do you think? Our fearless leader. David, are you there?
What word did you say?
I just wondered if you had a couple words for our audience here. We have some people.
Well, I just want to welcome you. I really appreciate Michael and Kit and everyone and Rajesh who have set up this program. It's allowed, I can't remember how many co-hosts you have on the program, but of course, Pikes Peak, where I am the section chair and located, is one of them. And we certainly have appreciated all these programs this summer.
And also we have Dr. Li-Fang He on here. Li-Fang, can you say hello also? Because she's going to be helping with coordinating the upcoming seasons as well. Li-Fang, do you have a couple seconds?
Yes. So can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, Li-Fang.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Since I'm in the hospital, so that's why I didn't open my video. Sorry for this.
No. It's nice that people get to meet one another. And David, thank you. It's really great to have a chance to not just hear the speaker, but to meet each other. It's very cool, and to get an idea who's doing what, and invite others to participate and volunteer for something, and join in other meetings. It's a great opportunity.
Yes, really. Yeah, I learned a lot of this, and thank you so much for this informative sections. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Yeah.
We'll see you next time.
Okay.